Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition. It is our Drive to Survive review. I am John Pollock, and joining us, he is everyone's P1, Wei Ting, who is with us, and a very special guest, Chris Elliott, on the line with us as well. What a collection of race experts that we have here between me and Wei that are going to try and live up to Chris's knowledge base. Hello, Chris.
How are you all doing?
We're doing well. We're ready to drive and survive over this next hour as we discuss season 5 of Drive to Survive. And Wei, you made the selection to bring on Chris. So first of all, let's start a little bit, Wei, with just your thought process of starting this show and reaching out to Chris.
Well, John and I wanted to do this sort of series because, we're both very excited, of course, for the new season. And we wanted to talk about it anyway. I personally felt that there might be slight expectations for us to, make sure that we have all of our facts right. And I just simply didn't feel like we were capable enough ourselves. I mean, as knowledgeable as you and I are. So, I thought to look to our sort of like our community of people that have kind of taken a step forward as I don't necessarily want to say leaders, but people that have expressed a knowledge of the sport far beyond us. And Chris is actually somebody who I would actually classify him as a bit of a leader in terms of talking about F1 and carrying on much of the conversation, especially in the Discord. So this felt like a perfect opportunity to have Chris on as one of the voices, and that will be leading on throughout the review.
Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about how far you go back with F1, and do you look down at us Drive to Survive noobs that have jumped on post-pandemic?
So I go this is the only things that are probably the same kind of length of time for my fandom is pro wrestling and football. That's how far back this goes. It's I remember sitting down. I'd lived pretty much in the country, so there wasn't a great lot to do apart from sit with my dad on a weekend and watch sport. And 9 times out of 10, that was either soccer or it was motorsport of some kind. And F1 was usually the one that was on TV.
Yeah. And what is your perspective on this sort of newfound fame, international attention that F1 has had as a result largely of DTS?
I think that anything that grows the sport is a big thing. I know that there's a lot of the historical fans who are, oh no, we don't want to do this. I think F1's always really been it's kind of been a secretive sport, and whilst the ability to see inside the sport is amazing for I think a lot of the long-time fans, it's the influx of new fans, I think to some is there's a bit of gatekeeping there. But I don't have any issue with it. I think any way that gets people into this, I love the sport, and it's any way that grows it is great.
Yeah. And maybe just a little bit of your perspective on Drive to Survive itself, and maybe not just yours, but what's the general consensus among maybe more of a diehard F1 fan base about this show?
I think the worry is just how the worry that comes from the long-time fans is how some of the some of the scenes aren't necessarily as in context as it should be. You look at certain situations within the show, and it's quite clear that that's not quite the order that these things happened. Or I know Lando Norris in particular took issue with. I think he was doing a reaction video on YouTube, and he was like, "No, I remember that incident, and that's not how that happened." And they were trying to manufacture some kind of issue that wasn't really there. And I think that part of it, that's the negative part that we don't necessarily want to have in the sport. But the rest of it, I think the like the look behind the scenes is quite interesting. It's just you don't want to be creating a Real Housewives kind of
the Real Housewives of F1 is absolutely, pardon the pun, getting greenlit. I mean, that seems inevitable. The girlfriends of F1 maybe, because just imagine
starring Ginger Spice.
Ginger Spice could be the lead, and then just build around them. This could be tremendous television.
There's part later that I want to talk about Ginger Spice later on, because there's a part where I'm just like, she made me cringe, and it was really bad.
Yeah, and it's because of of much of that criticism that I think it's so helpful to have somebody like you on, Chris, to be able to maybe help us decipher of what might be reality versus what might be hyper edited in this case. And as a new fan like John and I, watching the previous seasons without having followed the actual F1 races, I don't know if we were any the wiser to any sort of manipulation that was going on. So it was really interesting for me to go through season 5, having seen the live races for the first time, to be able to maybe find out for myself, what might have been egregious in editing. So yeah, maybe we should just get into the episodes, John.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about episodes 1, 2, and 3. And then on subsequent Thursdays this month, we will be doing shows on the Post Wrestling Cafe with guests joining us, where we will go through the rest of the 10-episode season that is all out on Netflix for people to chat or to check out. So let's dive into episode 1, which is The New Dawn. And instantly, we are reunited with the star of Drive to Survive, Guenther Steiner, and his winemaking mate, I hope I'm pronouncing that, Mattia Binotto of Ferrari, who would have quite the tumultuous season with Ferrari. And this is the calm before the storm of the season to begin. And I guess maybe just to bring people up to speed, Chris, they are coming off one of the most dramatic endings to an F1 season ever between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. And this season 5, it feels as though everyone is caught up to the popularity and everyone understands just how big this is coming off of that 2021 season.
Yeah, it's that finale in Abu Dhabi. It's the Hollywood moment that you want. It's the everything coming down to the final moment, which obviously, spoilers, we didn't kind of get in 2022, but.
The season is basically over by the summer, is what we are going to be getting
pretty
to.
Much. But it was, and I think the combination, and this was another part that kind of created another bit of controversy in terms of how much of that ending was to play into the Netflix show and how much was to go into there. It was. But it was that start of the show. You've got basically the previously on, and it's showing you all the drama of the end of the season, and then you all of a sudden you just get dropped in, and there's the little Italian music and the little car going through the Dolomites, and it's the complete juxtaposition of these two moments. It gave me a good laugh seeing this change.
Because we're putting this on the free feed, maybe it's worthwhile to at least catch people up who might not even be aware of what exactly happened at the end of the 2021 season.
Oh, okay, so let's see if I can remember. So the season ends. It comes down to Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. They're tied on points. If Hamilton wins, he wins the title, obviously, and he's at the front. He has dominated the majority of the race, and with about 5 laps to go, there's a crash, and out comes the safety car. And the issue for Lewis Hamilton is then, right, do I change my tyres and possibly drop behind Max, or do I stay out and take the risk? And the risk was taken. He was going to stay out, which then allowed Max Verstappen to come in, knowing fine well that he could take the pit stop and not have to worry about losing a position because he was clear in second place. However, there were lapped cars between the two drivers. So we get to the position where they're about everything's cleared, but they need to get rid of the lap cars, and usually that's a 1.5, 2 lap process. But they let the cars go that were lapped. They let them go, And instead of waiting for those cars to get a reasonable distance around the track, they were then, right, those cars are clear, let's race. And that then meant that you've got Max Verstappen on fresh tyres that are just nicely warmed up after a few laps behind the safety car, and Lewis Hamilton on old tyres who's going to be struggling for grip. And there was a lot of unhappy people in Mercedes because obviously we got halfway round. The fresh tyres come in for Max, he gets past Lewis, and he wins the world title. There's a lot of unhappy people in Mercedes because it's like, well, hold on, how comes you've done this? In order, you've kind of manufactured the finish by allowing these cars to go past and not giving the extra time in order for them to get away, to give the lead cars the time, the space in order to race.
And the decision to, have the race play out that way was due to the FIA director, who subsequently was fired from his position in the off season.
Yeah, Michael Massey, his name was, and he was forced out, which was kind of understandable. Although I don't think he was put into a particularly great position himself. To begin with.
So very, one of the most controversial endings, I would say, as far as like these Drive to Survive seasons goes. Great television, but certainly brought up a lot of controversy among the fan base. In the audience's eyes, did they view this like Max Verstappen win as illegitimate? Like, is he coming into this season, or was it just more so like a disappointment that we didn't get a real proper finish?
From my point of view, speaking, I mean, obviously the majority of fans that I speak to will be British fans, and the majority of those will be Lewis fans. So there was a feeling of real bitterness there that like he got the title taken away from him, when realistically, I mean, Max was the better driver. Like if you go through the whole season, he was the better driver. He the lead that he built up, which obviously Lewis ate into over the course of the back end of the season, but there was definitely a lot of bitterness there towards the ending, and it almost felt as though this was manufactured, which made it, I think, difficult to take for a lot of people.
This season also sees the return of Max Verstappen to the series because Max Verstappen had removed himself from Drive to Survive, but he finds his way back here. And you are starting to see, at this point where they're 4 seasons deep, I think you have a lot of understanding among the drivers and the principals that Drive to Survive is this necessary evil that they can see. They can attribute so much of the explosion in popularity to this series. At the same time, there's criticism about the editing and how they are presented. And you have Toto Wolff here, who is my favorite principal / driver character in all of this, stating that this series is closer to Top Gun than it is a documentary. So I don't know what that means, because here's an Oscar-nominated film. So he's not disputing the quality, but when it comes to accuracy, maybe there is some heavy fiction involved here. But that seems to be among those is. For a Guenther Steiner, I think this guy would be like, if you want to shoot me sleeping, if you want to film me every day, I think Guenther Steiner is more than happy and realizes this is his greatest exposure. But for your Mercedes and Red Bulls that have a bit more leverage in things, I think they can be more selective. But this Max Verstappen return, I think even he understands that it's better to be on board than forgotten about on this series.
I wonder, like, Chris, do you know if there's like any sort of maybe higher, I guess boss that might be forcing contractually or something, Max Verstappen to participate?
Not as far as I'm aware. I know like everybody's kind of governed by the owners, Liberty Media, who are very much, this is their baby and this is what they like. They're as an American company, their like idea is they want to break America, and obviously, if you want to break into new territory, you want to get the best out of it. You need to have the like the top people in it, and Max was clearly a big miss. Although I dare say I've watched all of the season. I don't think he particularly adds all that much, but just having his presence and having him there, I think is something that was big for the creators and for Liberty Media in general.
Yeah. Go ahead, Way.
I was just going to say about that Toto Wolff line. I mean, I love the fact that they included it on the show. I mean, I think it's a very self-aware line for an edit to, not take that out. And it's almost as if like the show at this point is kind of embracing that criticism and being able to say, yeah, like don't watch this as if you're expecting a documentary. Watch this kind of like professional wrestling. Like we all know it's not real, but we find entertainment in the storytelling. And I would recommend people watch all reality TV with that same lens. Don't expect the documentary, expect entertainment.
So all our favorites are back. Guenther Steiner, reporter Tom Buxton is back as well. As
Buxton.
Dramatic as ever. Will Buxton, I'm sorry. Then I guess one of the major stories is the fact that going into this season, there are new regulations and a cost cap. Do you want to elaborate a little bit, Chris, on what this means for the drivers and the teams?
So for the teams, really, it's to help the smaller teams out, because you look at a Red Bull, a Mercedes, a Ferrari, and the amount that they're spent that pre-cost cap, the amount that they were spending was like ridiculous. And in order to allow the field to become more competitive, you've got to limit the amount that those guys could spend. So, say a Haas or an Alpine or Williams, whilst they're clearly that it's a lot of money that they're spending in realistic terms. In a comparative terms, it's next to nothing. It's so to try and make everything equal, like put the cap on, and then it means that the smaller teams can hopefully catch up a little bit. Although I don't necessarily think it's going to make an immediate impact. I think we're looking at long term here in terms of it actually meaning something.
And one of the lower end teams is Haas. That does get a lot because of the Guenther Steiner connection and the fact that the drama involving their rotation of drivers has been great for this series. They are featured here that they have a off-season controversy because of the Russian attack on Ukraine, and this ends up leading to their driver Nikita Mazepin being dropped from Haas, and thus the prodigal son Kevin Magnussen is back, and they put together a montage of all the blowups between Magnussen and Guenther, including the door being slammed, and he's back, and this is presented as his last shot at F1. So I don't know how many people were expecting Kevin Magnussen to be one of the featured players here on our first episode of Season 5, but he is back on Team Haas.
How often do drivers come back after, essentially being ousted from the league?
It's very rare. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's anybody in particular, but no, it's not something that happens particularly often. Once you're gone, unless you've had a particularly amicable split, the vast majority of times you're done with that team.
I'm also more and more enjoying that Gene Haas has now become almost like the George Steinbrenner figure on Seinfeld, that we never see him anymore. It's just Gene, did you see how we did today? And he's just on the phone. We never see Gene anymore, and he's like the mysterious Wizard of Oz that Guenther communicates with. And I'm sure like the editors are very aware, and the producers are very aware, because every time like Guenther says something remotely close to, I got to talk to Gene, I got to call Gene. I mean, it's one of the best things about the Guenther Steiner character. We can all relate to a man who is constantly stressed out about having to report bad news to his boss, right? So he's almost like the Waylon Smithers to Gene's Mr. Burns. It's a wonderful dynamic. Well, Haas, dude, they were doing cartwheels when Magnussen gets he He's the 7th fastest in qualifying. So a huge start here to the season for Haas.
What did you think about the edit that they made here, where like in qualifying they had like so they were setting up Magnussen as like sort of like the rebellious hothead who is famous for smashing a door on Guenther Steiner, and then there's like a team like communication through the headset for Magnussen, telling him that he only had like one lap to like really qualify. And then they almost they have Magnussen almost like zoning out and not responding immediately. And then they cut to almost like a dream sequence of like Magnussen thinking about his newborn child. And that's how we're informed that this is a changed man. This is a man who now has to grow up because he has a lot more to fight for. What do you guys think about that presentation?
It to me it was very much like the classic reality show, like the talent show, where it's like, and the winner is, and then you just get that like 10-second just delay, and like nobody's saying anything, and you just sort of like just spit it out and get it on with. That there is no delay in it. There is no kind of like split. There's like probably you ready, and he's like that's fine, but obviously you want to create the dramatic tension, and it's I did find the little montage was really funny.
There's also no better device to gain sympathy than some troubled figure who now has a baby. And now you're rooting for them. It's like, okay, now there's a baby relying on this man's success. So we are all Team Magnussen.
Wasn't this wonderful? Because like it gave you this professional wrestling, right? It gave you motivation for why this guy has to succeed on this qualifying lap. He's not just there to score a points for his team. He's there to essentially be able to provide for his family.
It's almost like a Dickie Bird promo for an Up Next Rumble.
Exactly. Sure. Yes.
I'm sure that was his inspiration in this episode.
It was sorry. It was just the way you've described it. It was almost like that. Sorry, I'm gonna stop. Sorry.
This was in Bahrain, correct? This was the first race of the season?
Yes.
So, and where they will be this weekend. So we go through with the race. Leclerc gets pole, Verstappen second, and that's essentially, these are going to be our two. Interesting that at the beginning, this is very much positioned as the rivalry, not so much Hamilton and Verstappen, but these are the two that are going to be gunning for one another for the championship this season. Verstappen, we look back at 2022 as this dominant run, but he got off to a really bad start, and we see him not even complete the race in Bahrain, and his teammate Sergio Perez loses power with 2 laps remaining. So both Red Bull cars do not finish the race. Leclerc wins, and Carlos Sainz is second, with Magnussen 5th, leading to our best line of the whole episode from Guenther. This is medicine. Medicine, Gene. We got medicine. Let me tell you, I gotta call Gene. So, dude, Ferrari is 1-2, and Red Bull does not even start. So, a far cry from the fortunes throughout the season. But after one episode, that is the early lead that Ferrari has on the field.
It's first of all, like, we're coming off of the last season that was completely dominated by this Mercedes versus Red Bull rivalry, and the first race, I mean I don't know how many people, at least if you're only following the results from the prior season, expected neither of those teams to even be in real conversation for winning the race, and how many people would have expected a Haas to take a P5, which fifth in a race of 20, I guess, like, to the average layman might not seem that significant. But when you consider that you essentially have like 6 positions pretty much tied up by the top 3 teams, most races, Haas not even being in the conversation of like, somebody who typically vies for like a number 4, it's way beyond expectations for them. And what is the dollar, like, a difference, like, between, let's say, a P5 and I don't know, P9, for instance, like, or just even like each spot?
I mean, really, I don't think it necessarily has as much in terms of like from a race to race perspective. It doesn't really have all that much bearing. It's more so in fact, if you ask any of the teams, their priority really, rather than the drivers' championships, actually the constructors, because it's the constructors' championship that determines like the amount of money that you receive in prize money come the end of the season, and that can be, you know, one place can be millions and millions of dollars.
That to me is still one of the most enjoyable strategy elements to all of this, is that you're part of a team, and sometimes your goals are not going to be in alignment with your team's, and that's where you see competitiveness between drivers, and at times your team making a call to give up a lead, and a driver that might not want to give up the lead. I think that adds such an interesting strategy to all of this too, and how a driver is going to place themselves ahead of their teammate or concede to their teammate, and how that works for the overall goals of the company versus the driver.
I thought the episode also really set up well, you know, Mattia Binotto's story of this season, and that's him essentially sort of talking about the pressures of, you know, leading a team like Ferrari's, and how we kind of know it ends for him. Basically, this first episode was telling us that if he doesn't do well, he's going to lose his job, and you know, that unfortunately, you know, will come to fruition.
How did you feel, Wei? Like, at least for me, watching the prior seasons, I'm watching with like a fresh eye towards all this, and how is this going to go? And like, you following this season very closely, like, you know what the outcomes are in several of these stories. How did you find watching it when you know where, you know, the Ferrari principal is headed, and outcomes as well?
I think it takes away a bit of the suspense, you know, like last year or prior seasons, not knowing who was actually going to win the seasons. It made the show maybe a lot more exciting in that sense. From this perspective now, I'm also more so watching it just to see like how they retell the stories, how they edit the stories, and how they group them together. I'm watching it more from a production standpoint, almost the way like I watch professional wrestling a lot of the times if I know the result. Still enjoyable, but maybe without that initial suspense. You know, it's like watching something if you already read spoilers.
Can I ask a question for the pair of you? Where do you feel about the in-race commentary in terms of like during the documentary? Because I always have a bit of an issue with it myself, because you can tell the lines where it's like, it's clear where it's like in race. I know that there's like 2 or 3 different commentary teams that that run in terms of like English speaking channels, but I think I find it a bit of a bugbear of like, you can tell like when it's the real commentary and when it's like the fake commentary that's been like done in post production. So I was just going to ask, like, what do you guys think about that?
That's interesting. I can't decipher between the real and what's done in post production, but it's like, if you have an ear for that, it would bother me if I could, but I don't really have the base to really decipher between the two.
Yeah, me neither, Chris. You know, and I know it's been pointed out in the past how like they might go as far as to like grab clips from other races and to insert them into, you know, the retelling of a particular race just because it fits their narrative.
That would definitely drive me nuts if I could decipher it. Like, if I could tell between them, it would jump out at me a lot. So I could imagine that really annoying you.
I definitely think there's a line about like, you know, how much fiction you can insert into a show for the sake of dramatic effect, and they've definitely stepped close to, if not crossed that line on this show plenty of times, you know, to the point where it's angering the people that are being presented. I you know, I'd love to get your assessment on like whether or not you feel like they've pulled that back a little bit this season, or if you feel like it's just as egregious. But I definitely think it's a warranted criticism of the show. I
think there's a little bit less. I think that especially having the drivers themselves turning around saying, hey, this wasn't right, or this wasn't right, I think that's had a bit of an impact on the production of it. But I still think that there is bits and pieces where you can tell that's not right. That's different to what how I remember this actually happening at the time.
As soon as we get one of the play-by-play commentators, what an episode of Drive to Survive this is going to make. That's what I think my warning signs will go up. But let's move on to episode number 2, because this tackles one of the major themes of the past season. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready. It's going to be a bumpy ride. It's time to talk about porpoising. Wei, I think this was your favorite element of F1 in 2022, the development of porpoising in our episode Bounce Back.
The Bounce Back, lovely title. Yeah, so this is I would say dominant story, maybe, throughout the first half of the season. It seems the fact that all these cars were suffering from, or at least the majority of these cars were suffering from this relatively, unpredictable phenomenon where they can't control these cars from bouncing. And so much of this is the result of a new design across all the vehicles. Care to talk to us a little bit more about that, Chris? How often does F1 maybe demand these sort of new designs, and what was it about this particular season that caused such issue?
So usually it's maybe in terms of such a major change to the regulations, you're looking at maybe 6-7 years. That you'll have odd little tweaks here and there from year to year, but nothing in comparison to what we had with this year. The long and short of it was that as part of the regulation change, they were having to lower the cars in order to produce the downforce that they were needing to give the cars the grip that they have to go around the corners as fast as they can. So as the air goes underneath the car, it pulls the car down to the ground. It's called ground theory, apparently. It pulls the car down, and the faster you go, the lower it pulls the car. The problem being that obviously if you pull it too far down, that airflow stops, and the car then bounces back up because it doesn't have the airflow to pull it down. And then as soon as the car goes up, the airflow goes underneath and pulls the car back down, causing the bouncing effect.
Interesting. So this was something that plagued, the way it was presented, it almost seemed like almost all the teams, right? But they were quickly able to, at least a lot of them were quickly able to at least remedy it to some extent. But the team that seems to be hit hardest by it was Mercedes all season. Why did it take so much longer for Mercedes to try to figure this out than the other teams?
Terrible team.
Yeah. I think it's just the way with how they've looked at the specifications and the regulations. Each of them, you see in the start of the first episode where everybody's going around each other's cars and they're like, I'm not sure about that car. How does this car look? And obviously there's major differences between them. And obviously for some reason Mercedes design just doesn't sit well with coping with this porpoising.
Yeah.
We also get our full reintroduction of the most smug team principal in all of F1. It's Christian Horner of Red Bull, who is just delighted at the fall of Mercedes after years of domination. This man, he just has an air about him that, well, it's unfortunate that they're having so many problems. That's glad that we're not having any of these issues, because we're poised to have a great season. So this would also lead to pretty much the godfathers of all these teams coming together for an F1 meeting and just having it out with one another, because Toto Wolff is Toto pissed at all of these drivers that they're trying to hurt Mercedes. They're leaking stuff to the press, and they don't know if Toto Wolff is just playing up for the cameras that are present for this meeting, and Christian Horner is never going to give up an opportunity in front of your camera, who is listening to all of Toto Wolff's complaints about Mercedes, what they're going through, and his advice, well, then change your fucking car. And Toto is just sick of all of this. I could have heard Christian Horner and Toto Wolff go back and forth for the whole episode. This would have been fine with me. This was they should do these A few times this season, bring all the principals into a room to yell at each other. I loved it.
What was Toto like trying to get changed here in a meeting like this? What was he arguing?
I think it maybe just like a regulation change or something like that. Maybe he was trying to he wanted something changed so that they could reduce it was like reducing the ride heights that were necessary or something. I don't know, but it just the way that they were arguing, especially with that change your fucking car, and then Toto's like, well, Checo says your car's fucked, and it's just sort of like, yeah, but it's just like kids arguing. Obviously not with the language, but it's just like a bunch of kids arguing, like yours is shit, no, yours is shit, no, yours is shit. It's just brilliant.
But like ultimately, Christian Horner was right. Like, you know, like why should we change? We figured out this problem. At least, you know, according to his own drivers.
I think Mercedes comes off looking very poor here. Like, to your point, everyone experienced these issues. Everyone has gone through the regulation changes, and it's one or two teams that are still having these problems. The most prominent being Mercedes. Like, it's problem solving, and you haven't solved the problem. We have. Why do we have to take a step back instead of you raising your level to where we have ascended to?
And if Toto truly, like, you know, cared about the safety and the health of his drivers, could he not have simply like increased the ride height or something? I mean, it would force him to slow down the car, but would that not have solved the issue? So, like, you know, if he just decided to slow down the cars?
Yeah, it would have. But as you say, it's as someone who I think is as proudly competitive as Toto Wolff, I don't think he could kind of step back and say, you know what, maybe we should just step away from the top end while we sort this out and we figure out what the problem is.
Right. But it you know, it just kind of pokes some holes at like the argument. You know, you care about the safety of the driver, but you also want to be fast enough to, you know, win these races. So which is it?
And as well, you have the comparison. And one of the races they cover here is in Azerbaijan that Max Verstappen wins. And George Russell, who has been added to Mercedes, he finishes P3, while Lewis calls it the worst race ever. And this porpoising issue is having a great impact on Lewis, who is also getting he's injuring his back from this on top of it. They're starting to talk about, is Lewis going to walk away and retire from the sport? And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed as though as this issue was plaguing Mercedes throughout the first half of the season, it had a much bigger effect on Lewis than it did George Russell.
Yeah, it seemed to me as though whether it's something to do with the way that Lewis wants to set up his car or not, I don't know. But it seemed to me as though it was more of a Lewis issue than a Russell issue.
I wonder how much of that comes down to just like maybe the age of the driver as well. Like, you know, could it be that like a younger, you know, driver is able to withstand something like this a little bit more than somebody, you know, in his 30s? Yeah. But I just remember that like Baku race being especially heartbreaking, you know, not knowing all the issues that Lewis had already gone through, and then seeing him get out of the car, just beaten down. It was that point where I think like much of the audience was demanding to see changes, because we don't want to see drivers, you know, harmed in this way.
It also seems as though this season, more emphasis than ever on the car radios, because, man, do you have some lines this season. Like Leclerc, I don't think anyone touched. Fuck. But, man, and they range from utter anger, like out-of-body experience anger, versus such sheer disappointment where it's just these broken individuals, to utter defiance in the case of like a Max Verstappen. Like, please do not bother me. Please, enough. Understood? I am not doing this. I just think like the radio transmission, it adds so much to just getting into their heads in real time, where they are just, it's on pure emotion.
How did we feel about the Zhou Guanyu crash? The way it was presented. I mean, it was one of the most intense crashes I've seen covered on DTS, and a miracle that the man came out unscathed thanks to, you know, the halo essentially. But how do you guys feel about the way it was presented here on Drive to Survive? Start with you, Chris.
Or yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Yeah.
The first time that we saw it. It was obviously not like knowing it was coming, and they'd shown in the trailer they had the in car view of Zhou, as you can see the car tipping over, and then obviously it just goes off. But it was, I think they handled it relatively well. You're not yet you portrayed the drama, but you didn't push it to, I think, the levels that they did when with the Roman Grosjean crash back at a few years ago, where you're going into this and like, is he dead because of this fireball and this, that, and the other? Whereas I don't think they necessarily left it as long for you to wonder just the state of how Zhou was.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just from my pretty much one solid season of following this, I think they're extremely respectful when these crashes happen. They do not, I don't feel they exploit it at all. They don't shoot it. They sometimes don't even bring it up until they are aware that the driver is safe. This being Netflix, it's obviously they are leaning heavily on the drama, and this was certainly one of the more dramatic moments of the season. My question to you, A, is that if you were part of this production and you were shooting in beautiful HD and this, like, they are showing this crash in slow motion, would you be able to just keep your camera on this car as it is rotating at debilitating speeds, and just realize that you have to capture this moment?
You mean like from the perspective of like knowing that this person might be dead, or just like the physical feat of
like we have a perfect shot of the person is on like race level and is shooting this car as it's flipping in midair in slow motion. Like, it's a perfect shot of this crash as it is happening. It's the cleanest shot you're going to see of this crash. And just the idea of getting in the headspace that you might be shooting a man dying and you have to make sure that you get a perfect shot of this. Like, that is your task.
If that's your job, that's your job, right? You know, obviously, like if you're close to the action, and I think if you're choosing between whether or not you can actually physically get out to help the person, you put the camera down, you help the human being, which is what George Russell did. But if you know, somebody has a job to do to be able to capture this for whatever reason, maybe even just for legal reasons in the future, I think you just go ahead and do it if that's what you're assigned to. I found it interesting that they were able to relate this. I mean, the overall story of this episode was about Mercedes, and they related this to George Russell because he was the guy who was closest to the scene, and he stepped out of his car to go and help Zhou Guanyu in what was his home race. You know,
this is the British Grand Prix.
Yeah, and he was no longer able to continue. Now, I found it interesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but wasn't he unable to continue with the race, not because the car was damaged, but because he technically stepped out of the car?
Yeah, which the fact that it was never mentioned as so that was why he was out, that was and it was an interesting editorial point, but that was what it was. I think the car was perfectly fine to carry on because it was only like a slight knock that he'd received, and I'm pretty sure that if he'd stayed in the car and drove back around, he would have been able to have restarted.
It makes you wonder why they didn't mention it. You know, was it to protect F1? Because if you're trying to tell the story of a hero, a man who sacrificed his own hometown race in order to help a fellow driver who, you know, was involved in a very serious crash. I mean, that's a wonderful storytelling element. I mean, for a terrible, incident. But why did they not mention it on this episode?
Your guess is as good as mine. I think that, like, that rule possibly that you're not allowed to go and help somebody who's crashed. That could possibly be a reason, but. I mean, it shouldn't be. As you say, it advances the story of George Russell.
And they interview Zhou Guanyu after that. He said it was scary, and he just closed his eyes waiting for it to stop and talked about how much it meant to him to have George Russell come help him. And yeah, I mean, this was a race I was watching live, and I was frightened watching this because you can see in the background this car that just flies off the track, and it's a while before you get a solid update on it. But it was pretty scary to watch in real time, and thankfully he appeared to walk away from this. If like he didn't even miss a race after this. He was back whenever the next race was. It was either the following weekend or 2 weeks after.
Yet just, another incident that proves just how important the halo is and these sort of advances are for, to protect the safety of these drivers.
And that was something that years ago there was even a lot of opposition to the Halo initially, that how could those cars don't look right, and it was more of a looks thing than obviously the safety aspect of it is amazing, and it was just, no, those cars don't look right. You can't have cars driving around with this big monstrosity around the drivers. But obviously it's been shown over the last few years just how right of a decision it was to put those halos on the cars.
So the British Grand Prix, though, it continues, and they go to the original grid order, and this puts Lewis Hamilton back to the P5 position, and we get a bunch of drama here at the end. Max Verstappen gets a tire puncture and gets overtaken by Carlos Sainz, and Hamilton goes for a tire change, and then you have Lewis Hamilton asking his team, after he's leaving, are you sure this is the right tire? And he discovers that there is no grip on these tires. And Hamilton is able to overtake Verstappen and Leclerc for first at one point, but does end up finishing P3, but also gets the fastest lap, and it ends up with him being happy with his placement. And this ends the question that they had been surmising throughout the episode of whether Hamilton is going to walk away or not, that this is his commitment to the team. But we would have plenty of questionable team calls throughout this season between various Mercedes and Ferrari still to come of that people would call into question.
Mm-hmm. This tire strategy is certainly one of those things that I don't know if it's been emphasized enough, watching, past seasons of Drive to Survive. Strategy itself, I don't think is something that Drive to Survive necessarily gets into, or as far as when to use softs, when to use hards. It's more so just the idea of whether or not the people giving the orders are giving the right orders, and whether or not the actual drivers are agreeing or disagreeing. But do you feel Chris, that the show does enough to educate a would-be fan about just more so the technical aspects of the sport?
I don't think it does. I mean, even for something like the porpoising thing, obviously the majority of the episode is about that, and you get in terms of explanation, it's literally just Will Buxton saying, "Yeah, this was the new regulations, and now we've got porpoising, and that's it." There's next to nothing, and I think obviously it's the intention of just of the show just to be here's the racing, and then if you climb on board, then you can kind of learn about it once you get to watching the real racing. I know they want to be able to keep the show going at whatever pace they have, and maybe sticking in a little 30-40 second thing of this is why this has happened and this is why this has happened. I think it might just interrupt the flow of the show, and I assume that would be why.
Yeah, and I'm also assuming that this series, and maybe part of the reason why it's been so successful, attracting a non-typical race fan, is the fact that they're trying to make it as relatable as possible to somebody who might not have any existing interest in the racing itself. It's more so just a vehicle to tell the story of this, your favorite versus another favorite, and this is why this guy isn't winning. But I'm certainly at the level now where I crave more of that technical knowledge, and but maybe that's not the intent of this show.
I think this show is more about growing that audience, bringing people in, and developing fans that you can then go out by yourself, and you can find those outlets on your own. This is more about the human drama, and I can't fault from that. But the hope would be that you create fans that are more interested in that type of stuff, and then all of a sudden you're listening to podcasts about all the different tire formations, as I was doing this morning. So our final episode we'll talk about today is episode 3, Matter of Principle. Some great naming.
How about these titles, John? What do you think?
not lighting my world on fire. I think if you gave me some time, I could probably go like Toto Recall would be one of mine. I think for sure.
Very good.
There we have it. We get these awesome outtakes of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz cutting a Shell commercial, and these are horrible actors being placed into a Shell commercial that I'm sure these Shell executives were just ecstatic to have.
There's nothing better than sports stars trying to do commercials, and just the level of acting is so poor, and it's just it makes for a new level of hilarity.
It was just totally cringeworthy. And then this is, a major focus of 2022 is the continued expansion into the U.S. And this sees the Miami Grand Prix, that if there is a race so far that these race car drivers and teams, they feel like utter rock stars here. This huge event they have at Hard Rock Stadium, and we get a party where the drivers are just hanging out with all of these celebrities. And is this where the Jerry Halliwell cringe moment came for you, Chris?
It is very much so when she's talking so patronizingly to Matteo Binotto, and it was just sort of like, oh, your car's really fast. And it's like, oh my God, just stop. Just please stop.
It was like one of the more awkward, like cringeworthy conversations I've seen featured on a reality show in quite some time.
Oh, that's your car. That's adorable. That's your strategy against my husband's Red Bull.
That's great.
Yeah, that's
you won the first race. Good for you.
My Christian wouldn't have done it that way, but you do you. You do you.
Yeah. This like the fact that Jerry Halliwell is even a part of this world, again, like it's one of those things, as somebody who had no prior interest in F1, it's one of the most bizarre yet like very enjoyable things about this entire show.
I so want David Beckham to get in on a ownership group of some sort and come in. Maybe he'll pair up with like Michael Andretti or something. But yes, we're kind of jumping around to different races here. They focus on in Monaco, where they undergo. This is where Leclerc loses his mind.
The entire story of this episode is, I mean, now that we've established that Ferrari are sort of like the best chance of like dethroning Red Bull at the top. This episode is about the implosion of Ferrari. I mean, Leclerc is doing, by all accounts, really well. Sainz just won Silverstone. Or at least, sorry, that bit of a spoiler, but like they're in contention. They're actually leading Red Bull in the constructors, and due to bad strategy calls, this reign is slipping away from them.
Yes, this episode is signs of things to come for Ferrari.
Hey.
Another great title.
There you go.
Sure.
I'm on, guys. So yes, so in Monaco, Leclerc doesn't finish, so he very calmly screams at the top of his lungs.
He did finish. He did finish though, didn't he? But he didn't place like in the top three.
I wrote down here he didn't finish. I don't think he finished.
No,
in this race.
he didn't get on the podium. He finished,
Okay.
but he didn't get top three.
Okay. So Binotto admits that there were multiple strategy errors in Monaco, and he admits that the team really feels this criticism, and this is as Verstappen and Perez pass Leclerc in the points, and you're starting to see Ferrari come apart at the seams after that solid start in the first race of the season, and now you are seeing it's not just a bad week, but it is compounded issues that Ferrari is experiencing, and a huge spotlight given the Ferrari brand.
Mm-hmm. I thought it did a good job in like presenting to you just how much of a team sport this is. You could be the best driver in the world, but if your team gives you bad strategy, or if your car is for whatever reason not performing the way it should, you're not going to win anything. And this kind of showed you that you could be a driver on a team, and you can start doubting your leadership. And it's certainly in this collage of like fuck ups from the team, or at least the team principal, shows you how maybe inept you start to feel that Mattia Binotto is, and this was certainly a bit of a running this conversation, among the fan base as week after week, Leclerc's sort of chances of winning the drivers' championship continue to slip.
And Carlos Sainz is asked his thoughts on the setbacks at Ferrari, and his thoughts are, "It is shit. It is horrible." And he proclaims, "I'm Spanish. I'm going to go full Latino mode." And this is our darker version of Carlos Sainz, he's not putting up with any of this anymore. He is, as they claim, there is no number one driver at Ferrari. And Carlos Sainz is showcasing a lot more personality here in this season.
Yeah. Do you feel, Chris, that like Binotto did particularly bad this season, or was there what's sort of been the sentiment towards him in prior seasons? How long has he been principal for Ferrari? Was he just particularly bad this year, or was it building up to this?
Off the top of my head, I'm not overly certain as to how long he's been there for Ferrari, but
I think he came up in their system, like he had been there, kind of just rose the ranks up to team principal.
I think it was once Stefano Domenicali left to become the head of the FIA and F1 in general. I think that was when he became
2019
team principal. Yeah, so I don't think there was particularly anything that I'm aware of that was negative towards him. It was just, I think, because there was just a series of bad call after bad call after bad call, and I think that just started putting seeds of doubt in people's minds as to is he the right person for the job? And clearly, the answer was no in the end.
So we see another kind of perspective of the Zhou Guanyu crash, where it includes his video inside of his car that just goes out as the crash occurs, and then the restart that happens afterwards. And this is where Sainz, he is the one that has the pole position at the British Grand Prix. So when the restart occurs, he is up at front, and the drama comes at the end when Max Verstappen has to box, and Ferrari instructs Sainz to allow Leclerc to pass. And Sainz comes in for new tires, but not Leclerc. They keep him in with his existing hard tires. Am I correct so far in this assessment? So we have new tires for Sainz, and Leclerc is on his old hard tires.
There was a safety car as well, so this was the safety.
Right, this is after the crash.
It was, who was it? Somebody pulled up on the old pit straight, and that was what caused the safety car. And then Sainz comes in for the new tires.
And earlier we have Leclerc pretty much being asked about, if he has contradictory decisions to what the team instructs him, and he pretty much says there is no disobeying the team. You follow those orders. And here we have the opposite occur when Carlos Sainz goes into business for himself, and he overtakes Leclerc for the lead, and Leclerc is just remarking, "Fucking hell." And Sainz wins the race. It's his first F1 win, and this goes to the point, this was great for Sainz, but did this benefit the team overall? And you've got Binotto here who has to put on a happy face, but there is obvious dissension here within the Ferrari ranks, although one of their drivers does win the race. So it is kind of that interesting dynamic we were talking about before of whether this was a celebratory moment or not.
Mm-hmm. I thought it presented a good case by the end of the episode for justifying Sainz. First of all, Chris, was this the way it played out in reality to your knowledge? Did Sainz go into business for himself, so to speak?
Kind of. So I think there was a bit of back and forth between engineer and driver, and it was more so give Charles the 10 car length lead, protect him, and he was very much coming back saying, "Look, that's not gonna do us any good. That's gonna damage us, because if I've got Hamilton on my back and he gets past, then Leclerc's a sitting duck." And it was more so of, just let me go, and it'll protect our lead. It'll protect Ferrari's win, which it was. I think it was the right call in the end. But in terms of, and I think there was a line at the end that Ted Kravitz, Sky's pit reporter, said his line at the end was, "What a day for Ferrari, but they won with the wrong car." And it was very much Leclerc's your number one driver. He should be the guy who's, if you're pushing for him to win the world title, he should be the guy that you're protecting and allowing to win. So maybe he should have been the one that came in for the stop for new tires and leave Sainz in the position of having the old tires and trying to protect the lead.
So a lot of layers here in several factors that leads to this result. But as far as the drivers' motivations go, you kind of empathize with the both of them, right? Leclerc wanting to protect his or at least his contention for the world championship, and then you have Carlos Sainz, who's never won an F1 race before. And I mean, as a maybe more of a as a Sainz fan, I kind of wanted to see that result itself, but I would say because of all these kind of conflicting reasons for each driver wanting to take the lead, I kind of felt sorry for Binotto here, and the stress of being a team principal, having to make all of these big decisions on the fly. Which team do I pull in to make the tire change? Am I going to screw one of these guys by bringing them in for a tire change? Hard to know, but that's why they get paid the the millions and millions of dollars, right?
Yeah,
and the stress that comes with it. Yes. So after 3 episodes, I guess, how would you assess, Chris, the start of the season and how much you were into this? I'll say myself that I feel I'm more engaged in the actual races now than I am the series. These first 3 episodes, I can understand that there's some compelling aspects to it. They have incredible access and such. I think if you're new to the series, you could get into it. But I did find myself just looking at it as though this is more to me of an add-on rather than the main course for your F1 consumption.
For me, because as I say, I watched the entire season on Friday when it came out, and it did keep me going. And I think in general it was pretty good. There are problems with it, which I'm sure you'll get to going on with the further episodes, but. It was those first 3, and especially doing the Mercedes story and the Ferrari story, which are really the main 2 stories of the season. Because Red Bull were away and were far and away the best. And when you've got a runaway lead like that, you don't really necessarily want to be covering that, because it's filming a 1-horse race. You don't. Does that make the sport look good? Whereas if you focus on the stories further down, this is quite interesting. There's this really good battle, which obviously sets up later on as Mercedes and Ferrari start getting closer, as the Mercs get better, the Ferraris get worse, and that's the main story going on further into the season. But it was, I think it was. There were solid episodes, and I think it set things up pretty well.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed it. Again, maybe knowing the results makes it a bit less suspenseful when I'm rewatching it. But I think I enjoyed it just to maybe as a refresher and a recap of some of the main storylines. And to the things I enjoy the most about the show at this point now are the behind the scenes footage that we don't normally get to see, that team principal meeting in Montreal, or seeing Guenther and Mattia Binotto driving around a beautiful vineyard. Honestly, one of the things that I really enjoy about the show is seeing the extravagant lifestyles of these millionaires and these sort of picturesque places that they live in. Even Guenther, in a future episode, living in this beautiful American cottage. It's not something most of us will ever get to experience.
Probably not. The final thing, after 3 episodes, who was the most compelling character of the first 3 episodes, Chris?
I would say Toto. I think his outburst, some of his outbursts in episode 2, I think whether he was kind of slowly turning himself into the villain of the piece, and just how he's having to change his expectations, change how he looks at where Mercedes are going forward. I think, for me anyways, I think it would be him.
Yeah, I kind of him and Bonotto in the first, like, it is, here are these dynasties that are now crumbling, or at least, falling from that perch, and how they deal with something that they're so unaccustomed to. Like, they are having all of these problems, and how that changes their own psyche, as these are like these born winners that have had so much domination in the sport. But I would say Toto, more than anyone, I think he's really subscribed to the Guenther Steiner approach to this of, I'm going to steal every scene I'm involved in, and every scene I am imagining how it will fit in the coming this season series of clips.
We are, of course, missing the vital part, which was his reaction to when the Zhou crash happened, and he's sitting there watching going on, and there's Tom Cruise stood next to him. He's like, "Is he okay?" And like Toto just turns to the engineer next to him, and he's just kind of like, "I don't know."
I was waiting for Tom Cruise to say, "So you compared this to Top Gun as opposed to a documentary. I just wanted to know what you meant by that comparison point."
I think it's a compliment, honestly. Like, Top Gun was a great action movie, and I mean, this.
Yeah, he didn't pick some crap action movie. I mean, Top Gun. If you're going to be compared to an action movie, you could do a hell of a lot worse than Top Gun.
Although, had he seen Maverick by that point? Or was he
did say, he only said Top Gun. He didn't specifically say Maverick. I feel he meant Maverick, but I don't know. We can't go too in depth into Toto's head. Best character for a spinoff, though. It's either Toto or Guenther. I think Toto you might have more legs with.
Yes, or maybe Toto Wolff, the dog, will get its own reality show.
That's right. The Adventures of Guenther and Jean.
That is the
like they go on vacation together.
Yeah, with the occasional appearance by Mattia Bonotto, like in that little. Yeah.
Something
Fiat.
Always goes wrong, and Guenther has to clean up the mess that Jean can't find out about.
But you never see Jean.
No,
you never see him.
He foots the bill for the vacation that they go on, and Guenther just has to make sure that this is not a money-losing endeavor for Jean. He's got a lot tied up in this.
Well, shall we talk a little bit about the race coming up this weekend in Bahrain?
Yes. So this is the opening race of the season, and I guess what are some of the key stories going into race number 1 and this season as a whole in Bahrain, Chris?
Well, this going into it, like obviously testing happened last weekend. As you would expect, Red Bull clearly looking the best. Hopefully, it's not going to be quite as one-horse racy as it was last year. From what I've been reading up, Ferrari were fairly quick. They had issues with their tires though, so we'll see if they can fix that. Mercedes, they had improvements, but still a lot of work to do. But this almost a surprise coming out of it was just how well Aston Martin were. Supposedly they were pretty good and could be a contender to be the top of the midfield cars.
And I guess, like, if you're somebody who's only watching Drive to Survive, you don't want spoilers, and maybe you should tune out here, because we're obviously going to have to talk about present day, but new drivers, for several of the teams, including Aston Martin, with Fernando Alonso joining.
Yeah, there was very much a merry-go-round with obviously Sebastian Vettel retiring at the end of last season, Alonso leaving Alpine to go to Aston Martin. He was replaced by Pierre Gasly from AlphaTauri, who was then in turn replaced by the former Formula E and F2 champion Nick De Vries. You've then got Danny Ricciardo leaving McLaren. He's been replaced by Oscar Piastri. And unfortunately, we have the end of Nicholas Latifi at Williams, who's a bit of a cult hero. I know on the post it scored.
The pride of Canada.
Yeah,
national hero here.
He's been replaced by Logan Sargent from who's an American driver. And
The only American, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't think it's been a good few years since there's been an American driver. Which, again, going back into the idea that they want to push F1 into the States, and especially with that being free Grand Prix in America this year, having an American on the grid could be a big game changer. And
Is Williams going to get 1 point this season?
I'm going to say no. I love Williams. That, like me growing up back, like watching it in the 90s when they like Mansell and Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve, and they had this amazing history with in that era. And so I've got a soft spot for Williams, but just the current state of the team, I don't see them improving enough to get somewhere.
And their team principal has been replaced too, right? Jos Capito?
You know more than I do on that one, then why?
I believe so. But
we also, I'm looking here at the teams that Haas, we're going to have to refer to them as their proper name, MoneyGram Haas.
And yeah, I was the final driver replacement is with Haas, and it's poor Mick Schumacher being replaced by the returning Nico Hülkenberg.
Another blast from the past as Nico is back. So yeah, one Canadian driver, one American driver. As Lance Stroll, I think he'll always have a position. Although I think he gets a lot more flack than he deserves.
There was actually some news with Lance Stroll today. He had a cycling accident a couple of weeks ago, so he was a doubt for Bahrain this weekend. But I know Aston Martin released a statement this morning saying apparently he's fit enough to race, so he'll be there on the grid this weekend.
All right. Well, any prediction? Who's going to come out on top this Sunday?
It's tough to look past Max, really, or at least either of the Red Bulls. I hope it's something different. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's where we're going to head.
From a technical perspective, like I guess, are there any significant changes in the car designs this year that we should be looking out for?
I know that there are a couple of changes to do with porpoising. I haven't got off the top of my head. I can't remember exactly what they are, but there's a couple of changes with that. And then because of what happened with Zhou, there's been modifications for the specification of the roll hoop on top of the car. So hopefully that if something were to happen, it wouldn't break off in the way that it did with that incident.
Yeah, I again, fact check me on this, but my understanding is that they've also added a new type of a harder tire than even the previous. They had these tires had a delineation of like C1 to C5. Does this sound accurate, Chris?
Yeah.
And now they've added the C0 tire, which would be the hardest tire for, I guess, the most difficult terrain to go through. So what that means, I'm not going to spoil it for everyone. What that means for
cool. They can go off road, like they can go on mud.
It's just a harder tire. I don't know. Maybe when you're driving through Las Vegas, you want to be prepared. You don't know what you could be driving over. True. Top of.
You're right. That's coming up when Vegas.
That's not till what, October or so. It's late in the season.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it is back end of the season.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the, like, when you hear that, I mean, it just screams like video game. It's like you're going to have Vegas as your backdrop. So it's not till November. So it's
November the 16th, and it's a Saturday as well.
Yeah, so it's really late in the season that they'll be going to Vegas, which I guess temperature-wise really doesn't matter. So, so how many American races are? It's Austin, Miami, and Vegas. Is it 3?
Yeah, those are the 3.
Okay. Where are we going to Montreal in the summer?
I don't know if I'll ever make it to an F1 race. Like, at these prices, like these are very, very expensive tickets.
What if we get bagels and we go watch it at a bar?
That I'm down for. Yes.
Okay.
I'm just looking at it, by the way, that Vegas weekend, the track time or the time it's going to start is going to be at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
so
that's right,
obviously
the night race.
they're going down the strip, and it's I'm so looking forward to it. It's going
to be very cool to do it at
10?
night. You don't want to do it during the day.
Amazing.
7 on the West Coast, I'm assuming, right? Because 10 on the East Coast, that would be like 1 a.m.
No, that's I've got it on the F1 website.
Yeah, dude, it's 1 a.m. Eastern time.
It's 6 a.m. UK time on the Sunday morning.
Huh. Yeah.
And it's
Saturday night at 1 a.m. So
I guess if you're doing it like primarily for a European audience, it would be more advantageous to have it a bit later. But yeah, like on the East Coast, are you going to even stay up for it, John? 1 a.m.
No, not on a Saturday. I'll watch it Sunday morning, like usual. That'll be me.
Will it depend if there's a UFC card on that night?
Well, there will definitely be a UFC card that night. The question will be if it's a pay-per-view or not. I would imagine UFC is going to steer clear of Vegas that weekend. I think concede the city when F1's in town. But anyway, it's a new season. I think one of the added advantages of Drive to Survive, if they really do give a lot of emphasis to, even if you have a blowaway season like last season, to get into the alternative spots and the Constructors Series as well, that guys fighting for third or even down, just to be in the top 10, that stuff matters. And that stuff can take on a bit more weight, even if, Red Bull is running away with things, which could be the case this season again.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So we'll all be following MoneyGram Haas and see how they hold up. And just to give everyone an update, Chris will be back with us later this month to go through some more episodes. But next week, we are going to be back chatting episodes 4, 5, and 6. And we are going to be joined by another member of the Post community. JC will be joining us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, JC has been, at least pretty interactive on our forums, talking a bit about F1, and she's somebody who actually does a lot of writing for the sport.
She has sent us some incredible breakdowns of F1, yeah. So I'm looking forward to chatting with her next week. So that'll be 3 episodes, and then Chris comes back on March 16th, and then we'll wrap up our look at Season 5 on March 23rd. So all month long, you can jump on to postwrestlingcafe.com for our follow-up discussions on Drive to Survive. And Chris, thank you so much for navigating us through the world of F1, and we'll chat with you in a couple of weeks and see how the F1 season is shaping up, and if Max Verstappen has already clinched the title this year.
Not a problem to come on, and it's an absolute honor to be on with you guys. It's been great.
And if you want to chat with Chris a bit more about F1, do join postwrestling.com/Discord, where I believe, Chris, you've actually just set up a fantasy league that people can join.
I have done, yes. If you go onto the Discord and go to announcements, you'll find a link there. It sends you to the F1 website where you can set up a team. And I haven't checked in a couple of days. I know that there was at least 5, maybe 6 teams in there already. But you can change your team throughout the season, and there's points for different things, for overtakes, obviously for positions in the race, all that kind of stuff. So so go there and join that and get involved with it.
And you know what? Just to kind of make things simple, I might even include a link to where you can join in the show description as well. So it's a great way to maybe get engaged. I'm gonna put a team together myself too, and take part in my first fantasy league.
All right.
Also, whilst we're talking about the Discord, as was run all of last season, every round, every weekend that the F1 is on, I will be running prediction competitions, all kinds of different subjects. Big shout out to the Lord of the Cord himself, Mr. Phil Chertok, for setting all of this up. But yeah, we have predictions on qualifying, on races, and all of that. And the biggest shout out goes to Caboose, who won last year's competition, and the table's all been set up again for this year, so we will see who comes out of it as the winner for this year.
All right. Everyone get behind Caboose. And maybe for the remaining episodes, I will make sure to get up a feedback thread, not just for thoughts on the series, but if you have some basic questions just about F1, send them in so Wei and I can say, I don't know, and we can pass it along to Chris and JC. So we will do that starting next week as well. So for Chris, Wei, I am John Pollock, and we got to go because We've got to call Gene.